I've been an online entrepreneur my entire life, specifically in the
Yep.
SaaS space, and I'm also a non-technical founder. So I would love to steer this conversation from the lens of either a non-technical SaaS founder or any entrepreneur that's not very technical that is entering or thinking about developing a software or an online product or service. So
Sure. You just described about half of our client base, so we do this all the
perfect.
time. Yeah, that's
Perfect.
great.
So let's start from the point of assuming the entrepreneur has a great idea, they've validated the idea, there's product market fit, and now it's just a matter of building the thing. So there's this non-technical entrepreneur with his ideas, his mock-ups ready to go. So what's the first step that entrepreneur should take?
Yeah, that's a great question. We like to start with what we call a design session, and it's not just 1 hour or a workshop, but it covers anywhere from a week to sometimes as much as 4 weeks. And during that design session, we do a lot of the things that obviously we think are helpful before you build a product. Um, One of the first places we start is with business canvas. We want to understand so at Code Éxitos, we're builders. We work with clients like this, and they come to us, and it's a lot of arm waving, and they're like, "Hey, how long is this going to take, and what's it going to cost?" So the first thing we do is we get a business canvas in place, and we want to know who our audience is, who the personas are. Now, in some cases, like you mentioned in your intro, they've done a lot of that work, and that's great. It speeds the process along. But if they haven't, we want to get really focused on that. The other thing that our design teams really obsess about is what is the most essential piece of your solution that you need to get clients locked into using the platform. You don't want people, you need people to convert and stay converted. You know that. You're a SaaS entrepreneur. And what we typically find is that entrepreneurs come in and they come in with about 5 years worth of ideas. And it's like, hey, we're not saying you can't build all of those things, but it's going to take 5 years. When we get into the market, what's the one thing we want? And once we dig around and we go through a whole lot of brainstorming about that, but once we get down to like what is the essential gee whiz thing here, then we're ready to really start doing the engineering design and some of the UX UI design. But we want to get right down to the most essential piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very important for sure. So you identify that central piece, that that one thing, that one value prop that you're going to be essentially pitching to your potential clients.
Yep.
And I think that's very important too, from just like an MVP point of view.
Mhm.
Establishing product market fit and validating the product as well to your audience. Uh, Assuming that's done, though, you validated it.
Yep.
Um,
Mhm.
what's sort of the first step in the actual development phase?
Okay. Different
You know
tech
what? Let me
leaders.
let me let me rephrase that. I want to speak to like SaaS products specifically. So
Yeah.
web-based SaaS products, because that's a lot of the listeners here are in the SaaS
Yeah.
community, and a lot of non-technical
Yep.
folks. So if everything you just spoke about is complete now, from the actual execution, the development, like where do you start? Is it UI? Do you get programmer development? Like what's the
We start with UX, and that sort of blends into UI.
yeah
And I'll clarify those in just a couple of minutes.
yeah
But if you want, we can come back to a really useful example of the first point in the MVP with talking about Uber. But to answer your question, or here on the table now, we start with the user experience, like what, and that's not how it looks. That's the UI, the colors and logo and stuff, the screens. That's UI work. But first, we start with the user experience. How is this user going to work with the app? I'll give you a really specific example, and it's a SaaS example. We're building a SaaS platform for a company called Materially. And Materially is in the aggregates business. They help aggregate suppliers get loads of stone and sand and potentially asphalt out to construction sites. So it's a multi-sided SaaS model, and one of the personas are truck drivers, and they have to use a mobile app. And truck drivers have very specific requirements and even limitations on the UX, how they use it. They're not going to dig into it like a millennial would on a SaaS product. So we start with the user experience, we get that defined, and then kind of in tandem, the UI is getting done, but we really only want wireframes. So we don't do a lot of high fidelity work yet. But once we've got a feel for what the experience needs to be and the design is going to look like as it matures over the course of the project, then the developers start on it. And we have at Code Éxitos, we have a very specific design process in coding, and we call it thin slicing. And what that means is we want, as quickly as possible, we want to get a complete end-to-end transaction working. It may not have all the features and options on it, but we want to know what the technical requirements are to go all the way through the system, if you will. And as you know, in SaaS platforms, a lot of times SaaS platforms, especially B2B platforms, have tons and tons and tons of business conditions and exceptions and rule-based handling and all that other stuff. We do that later. But first, we want to get the basic sort of, we can sometimes call it the happy path or the golden path. But what's this thing look like? And then from that, the engineers have a better idea of the total level of effort that's going to be required to get the thing built. So that's kind of a starting point. I'll take a beat and see if you have questions.
Yeah. Okay. So that thin slicing, is that essentially just like UI prototypes stitched together, or?
No. We want a complete transaction to go through the system. So let's go back to Materially as an example. It's not a hard business concept to understand. If I'm a contractor, I have a contract with the stone provider for, let's say, 100 tons of stone. And that 100 tons of stone is going to get delivered in 50 different truckloads. Okay, great. So a truck driver, party number 3, goes to the stone quarry, party number 2, picks up the stone and delivers it to party number 1, the contractor. Pretty simple. That's what we want to get done in a thin slice. We want to take one order, put the order in, have it approved by the second party, have it notify the third party, have the third party show up, and then demonstrate. And this is all obviously mocked up, or it's in a test case. So we've basically run the transaction all the way from front to back. Now, most people, like our client Materially, would say, wait, but there's all kinds of things, like, maybe it's bad weather and the guy can't pick up the stone, or he picks up too much stone, or he delivers it to the wrong place. All of those exceptions will build in later. But the first thing in the concept of the thin slice is the core perfect transaction of the system gets operational first. And you can think of that sort of as the spine of the logic that's in the system. And then we build out all of the exceptions and requirements become ornaments then on that spine. Okay. So it's real code and it's really working. Okay. It's just not production.
That's what I was gonna ask. Like it's actual real code. It's not just like a wireframe and like a mock-up.
Correct. It's real code. We want real code. Now it looks like a super skinny, stripped down version of the entrepreneur's vision. But what that does is it provides the engineering team a front to back view of, hey, how are we going to get this data up in the database? And how do we read it out of the database? And how do we present it on the mobile app? all of these fundamental things have to get worked out. And most systems, most SaaS systems now have interfaces. So they have an API that has to connect to, an accounting system or scales or something. And we want to get those figured out too, because it's like 80% of the work happens in the last 20% of the feature delivery. So we want to flip that model and make sure that we know where all the problems are early. So we're focusing our work efforts in the tough spots.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so that's interesting. So then when does the actual UI then take place? Is that after the stint pricing?
Yeah, and it kind of runs on a parallel track. With component-based development, it's pretty easy for the development team, the coders that are writing business logic, to swap in and out UI components. So our UX UI team starts early and they deliver. We clients are really good at iterating through that because they're seeing something. So they're starting to see high fidelity. Um, they're not even really mock-ups. It's the high fidelity artwork that will then get passed to the developers. It almost looks like the real app, um, but there's no coding behind it. So we use Figma or
Yeah.
some of the tooling out there now. And when that's done, then the developers kind of, I know they'll hate me for making it sound so simple, but they can sort of drop that into the code pretty easily while they're working on all the back end business logic. So it's not first, second, third for us. It's really kind of a simultaneous set of work streams. And again, as the product owner or the entrepreneur starts to, and this is the other thing that we think is really important, Costa, is that we think it's really important that the entrepreneur gets working demos as soon as possible. So it's not unusual for us to be demoing working software, within the first couple of weeks, or the first couple sprints. Now, it might not do much, but once the entrepreneur, not technical or otherwise, it doesn't matter. Once it starts to be something you can touch and look at and use, more ideas typically start flowing out of that. So then we have an iteration cycle going
Yeah.
on. So we want to keep that feedback loop really, really tight, really, really fast from seeing something work and making edits and having those edits implemented by the next time you see the next demo. So
Yeah,
um,
that's
that's
true.
how
Once
that's how we
you can
build it.
actually like feel and touch it and see click things and it actually starts moving around, like you can actually it's yeah, you can just get more ideas, and that makes sense for sure. And yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go.
I was just going to say for the audience, and especially for the non-technical entrepreneurs that you have in your audience, it's really important to get functionality as fast as you can so you can see that your team's producing it. It's really, really easy to get seduced into looking at mock-ups and looking at design documents and picking colors and moving buttons around. And you can exhaust, it's all important, but you can exhaust a huge amount of your budget and timeline just chewing up, you know, picking the window dressing. And we've taken over projects uh, where the entrepreneur spent a lot of time doing that, and then found out the team either couldn't produce the working code behind it, or it was a mess when they produced it, or it didn't work. So the takeaway is, don't overinvest in the aesthetics of the software until you're really comfortable that the functionality is going to get delivered.
Makes a lot of sense for sure. And in terms of the development side, like once the UI
Mhm.
is coming together, like are the developers working in lockstep, or do you need a good chunk of the UI done first, or when does the actual development start to uh, develop in the back end?
Um, it depends. They tend to work in tandem. Like we usually have in a development team, we'll have one or more designers as part of the team, and they understand quite a bit of code, and then the developers understand quite a bit of design. So I would say it's mostly happening simultaneously. SaaS platforms in particular have a lot of stuff that happens with basically no interface. You know, it's stuff in the cloud, it's cloud formation, database management, that sort of stuff. So the teams that are working on those components of functional code really don't have a lot of, need or interest in the pretty
Yeah.
stuff, in the
Yeah.
designer stuff.
Okay. Now, is there always a need for both a front end and back end developer? And like, what's the difference between the two?
That's a really good question, and it's a really good topic. There are two things that get talked about in the industry a lot, and we don't use them at Code Éxitos. And one is, are you a front end developer or a back end developer? Um, we want people that are just good developers. Now they gravitate and they say, "Hey, I really like producing visual effects and interfaces and that sort of stuff." Great, you work on the front end. Other people are like, "Hey, I really love writing APIs," and so I guess that's a back end function. But we don't make that distinction. And the other one we don't make is we don't make distinctions about junior developers and senior developers. So they're good and they have some level of experience and they have some level of skill, but junior and seniors doesn't. It's not a very meaningful descriptor. But you need both. You need both. You need someone who's comfortable, building UI pieces and what we would call front end. And most teams have at least one or two people that just love working on the stuff under the hood, the back end. And so it depends on the project and the team size, but we usually see people allocating the work generally along those lines.
So the typical like then development stack is like a UI designer, a front end and back end developer. Is that generally accurate?
Yeah, yeah. So when you say a typical stack, do you mean like the team
Yeah.
composition?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We have at least a project coordinator on the thing. We can talk about their job in a minute. Um, and then there's a designer or a fractional designer. A lot of applications don't need a full-time designer. And then yeah, at least two devs, and they split the work. Now we see almost every SaaS application we build it in kind of an API based architecture and microservices. So it just makes the product easier to maintain long term. So, but yeah, generally, if you were saying, "Hey, what are you working on?" One person's going to be working on implementing the UI, and somebody else is probably working on the back end stuff. So yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Is it ever possible? Now, I want to come at it from the lens of like a non-technical founder, just
Sure.
trying to make these hires on their own, right? Just build the team on their own. Um,
Hmm.
so is it possible to like what the full stack developer is that someone who does both front end and back end? So can you technically just have one developer then if you want to like you have a budget or what are your thoughts there?
You can, and the answer is yes. That's what a full stack developer is. Somebody who says they're familiar with, you know, doing all of it, and they're out there. They exist. You can get one person and have one person do that. So it's possible. The project's probably going to build pretty slowly, and so that's the caveat there.
Are there any other
Excuse me. I think
negatives
you're
other than the time it would take to develop?
well. Yeah. I mean, so it's a single point of failure. It's a single risk. And we see this too. Even co-founders, a lot of times we will get entrepreneurs come to us and they say, yeah, our co-founder is the technical guy, almost always men, um, which is kind of a bummer. But, um, but yeah, they'll have a falling out, and now, so the CTO or whatever title he had, is gone, and we just had somebody we were helping. This was exactly their problem. The guy became, let's just say, problematic in the business, and the board had to oust him, and nobody knew what he'd been doing. And so they had to have somebody come in, us come in, take a look. And it's kind of junk. Um, it was, yeah. So he was sort of, because he was working alone, there was nobody for him to bounce ideas off of, or no one to push back on approaches, or some other things that happened. And they've got a big sized mess on their hands. So, yeah, a single developer is just a pretty high risk thing.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. And what's the typical like language now? Like this stuff's always changing and evolving, but like how should a SaaS be built like in terms of language nowadays?
Yeah. Um, I like that question for non-technical founders, especially to understand that programming languages sort of come and go in waves. They're in fashion and they're out of fashion, and so right now probably the runaway favorite and kind of our default is JavaScript, and we use a variant called TypeScript. So that's very common. Backend functions a lot of times will be built in Python. So you'll hear that come up very frequently. One thing that happens is, well, here's a really important context for people to keep in mind. If you're building a SaaS platform, you're going to live with this thing for 5 to 10 years. So that's a long time. And if you or you let your team pick some sort of marginal language, even if it's a good language, then what you're setting up is a long-term business issue that it's going to cost you more to maintain that marginal language in the future, just because there won't be as many people that understand it. And so I think when you're evaluating how you're going to build the product, the question isn't really so much around what language are you using, but more along the lines of, is this a widely supported language? Is there a large body of people who use this and contribute to the development of
Yeah.
the language? And that just means it's easier to maintain over the long term. Um, so that's this concept that we sometimes refer to as technical debt. Um, so,
And
but yeah, we tend to be a JavaScript, C Sharp, Python. We like to hit them right down the middle of the fairway. Those are all wildly popular, and yeah, our business model is that eventually we turn the code over to our clients, and as they grow their business, they take on their own staff, and then we move the code to them. So we want their future hires to be coming from as big a skill pool as possible.
is there a specific common codes for both front end and back end? So for example, if you're hiring a front end developer, like is there a common language for front end specifically?
Yeah. Um, well, JavaScript is really popular. And what you'll hear when you're talking to developers, or if you're reading resumes, or you're going on the job boards and looking, people will talk about a language and they'll talk about a framework. And so a language would be JavaScript, and a framework would be React or Angular or one of those. And frameworks are extremely common these days. We do a lot of React and React Native, for example. And what a framework does is, for non-technical people, I describe it as kind of a set of templates or macros that are, sort of pre-built for really common development functions. So usually you'll hear someone say, "Oh, I built this in React." What they're really saying is it's coded in JavaScript using the React framework. So you have sort of two
Right.
layers that you want to parse out
Okay.
there. Yeah.
So for frameworks,
Um,
React and Angular are the common.
yeah, Angular's kind of fading. In our opinion,
Okay.
we prefer React to it over Angular. We do some work with Vue, which is another framework. It's called Vue.js, so it's a framework in JavaScript. And there, you get into some subtleties. We'd have to get my CTO on the call here if we wanted to get into the detailed differences. But again, even with the framework, you want to make sure that your team is working in something that's broadly accepted. Um, a lot of programmers, by the way, just sort of gravitate toward, especially the solo programmer that you mentioned, Costa. They tend to gravitate toward whatever bright shiny object has got their attention, because it's like, oh wow, I think this is really cool. I'm going to use this language because it's new and it's cool, and you can get in. It'll work, but the long term maintainability of it could be questionable.
Right. And for backend develop for backend language, Python is the common,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, that's we saw that really take off. A lot of AI work and machine learning work is done in Python, and it just became wildly popular. So databases and database manipulation, cloud stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of Python out there.
I can see one of the again for a non-technical person, you're hiring
Mm.
some resources and stuff to develop your app. One thing that I can see very overwhelming and challenging is like just like the back end infrastructure, like setting up the servers and that type of
Hmm.
setup. So like, can you give any advice or tips on like what to look for, what to do? Is that a separate hire in itself, or is that like the back end developer taking care of that setup, or what does that look like?
Well, it depends on budget, right? If you're bootstrapping the thing, the budget's probably different than if you have a $5 million, a $5 million seed round that you're using.
Yeah, we're talking from a
Back,
bootstrap lens. Like let's not talk
okay,
about
so
the
bootstrapping,
yeah.
okay, yeah, we would we would consider a well-rounded back-end developer to have some experience in cloud formation and cloud use. So there are really only three clouds that you're going to consider: um, Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. Um, we work in all of them. I'll kind of give you my spiel on what they are. If you're building a SaaS platform and your target customer is a large enterprise, say a Fortune 1000 or a Global 5000 company, you probably want to look really hard at Azure, because your clients are almost always going to have a huge installed base of Microsoft product and Microsoft Cloud. So if you need to be incompatible in that sort of global Microsoft footprint, then Azure makes a lot of sense. Um, AWS is the biggest still. Um, and then Google Cloud, we see more entrepreneurs using Google Cloud. We're not big fans of it. Google Cloud, AWS allows us to get a little more granular in the services and a little closer to the tech infrastructure, kind of bare metal, if you will. Um, Google Cloud is serviceable, though. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not our jam. But back end developers should have a pretty good idea of what services are out there and how to use them. And you can think of the way I like to explain the cloud services to clients is it's like a giant Lego set, and each little brick is a different service or capability. Let's say having your users sign up and log in. Okay. All of that code is already built and managed in the cloud. All three cloud services have those Lego bricks available. So your development team really needs to understand what kind of bricks you have in your Lego set. Do you have the
Right.
sorry to nerd out on Legos, but I love
No,
them.
that's a great analogy.
Yeah, and so if you have this Star Wars Lego bricks in the bucket, building a treehouse isn't going to be so easy. You can do it, but it's probably not going to look much like a treehouse. But if you have the treehouse set, my granddaughter loves the treehouse set of Legos. Um, she's not going to build a Millennium Falcon with it, though. She can build something that she says is the Millennium Falcon. So that's the way to think about when you're talking to your developers about picking the cloud service. It's like, hey, does this give us access to the Lego bricks that we need to build our
So is
product?
it safe to say, like, for just the average SaaS company, like, you're not selling to Fortune, what, 1,000 companies? AWS is probably the way to go with like the most common bricks and Lego pieces.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's where we go with
yeah.
it. A client that comes to us and says, "Hey, I don't care. You guys pick the tech stack.
You're gonna go
We're
AWS.
probably going to be we're probably going to build it on AWS using JavaScript and one of maybe two frameworks. There will be some Python in the back end, and we'll be really disciplined about how we build and maintain the code."
Yeah. What are some of those common like Lego bricks you can say that every like most SaaS companies do need, like the login, like forgot password stuff, like what else is there?
Databases, logins and databases, dashboard capabilities. Somebody says, "Hey, I want graphs." My client's going to want graphs of how many tons of concrete we moved every day, or tons of stone we moved every day. Those kind of graphing libraries, visualization, AI and machine learning algorithms. Um, Startups, unless you're literally an AI startup, if you want to have AI capabilities or machine learning capabilities in your SaaS platform, um, you're not going to write those from scratch. You're going to go out and use um, the libraries of AI and machine learning algorithms that exist in one of the cloud providers. So that's a handful of the Lego bricks that you'd
Yeah.
look at.
So is it safe to say then that like the back end developer is really like utilizing a lot of these like bricks? We're calling them bricks, but like these services from
Yeah, they're
AWS, and just
services.
like kind of stitching
Mhm.
everything together rather than like writing their own code.
Um, yeah, the reason I'm pausing is that yeah, that's generally correct. There's still a lot of local code that needs to be
Yeah.
written. But yeah, you're going to have a pretty high dependency on these external services.
Hmm. Okay. You mentioned API based infrastructure. Can you just explain that? Like, what is that? Like a non technical person, I'm sure, does not have no
Yeah.
idea what that is.
Yeah, APIs are a way for two pieces of software that are written for completely different purposes to exchange information in a controlled way. So if my software wants to look up your name and address from your software, I don't want to write code that goes directly into your software, because then if you change your software and you move where you're storing the name and address, then my software breaks and I don't know why.
Hmm.
So we agree to exchange this information through what's called an API, which is an application programming interface. So if anybody's at a cocktail party and they want to drop some tech talk and sound like they're a tech founder, they can. Um, but I would write an API that says, "Hey Costa, I need the name and address," And I would write that request in a way that your API would say, oh, sure, Carlos, I understand what you're saying. Here's the data. And then I can do whatever I want with the data. So we're just asking questions through a common defined interface.
Yeah.
And so like in integration work, those APIs can become even strategic pieces of the code. We have a client whose SaaS platform um, does a lot of visualization of corporate data, and of course, their clients wouldn't give them direct access into their code, and two, you'd only ever have one or two clients, and you'd collapse under the weight of doing it. So everything's defined through an API layer, and it takes a little more architecture and a little more thoughtfulness in the coding, but you get a lot more flexibility out of it in the long run.
Are a lot of so should if you're hiring a back end developer, should like a prerequisite be like this person should have a good handle on API infrastructure and development?
Yeah, definitely. You want them to be able to demonstrate that we talk about architecture and software architecture, and that's a really deep topic and one that I'm only semi qualified to bloviate on. But I would be asking that developer, what sort of architecture do they like? How do they use APIs in their architecture? How do they use services? How do they envision data coming in and out of the application? And like most developers at that level, they'll grab a marker and go to the whiteboard and start writing stuff out. And it's going to look a lot like Lego bricks with arrows flying around. I know you've seen those diagrams. You've probably, edited a few yourself. Um, but that's really the logic of how all of the pieces talk to one another. So yeah, your back end guys would normally take care of that.
Okay. And so talk about like ongoing. Is your service then? Talk about you for a second and your company and how you help
Mm-hmm.
SaaS founders. So are you helping just build that initial product, or are you just like embedded? Your resources are just embedded part of the team forever. Like how does your service work?
A little bit of both. Forever's a long time. I would say that the majority of the people that come to us to develop their product, we do a lot of SaaS products. We do other products like IoT products, that sort of thing. But if they're early stage companies and they're non-technical founders, normally we become a turnkey service for them. But then as they gain traction in the market, maybe they get that first round of VC money or something like that. I spent 2 days with one of our clients that's in exactly this phase. Um, they start to add staff on their own, and then we just transition some or all of that um, work to them. We don't At Code Éxitos, our goal isn't really to lock anybody into forever. We like it. I mean, a number of our clients have said, "Hey, this just solves a lot of headaches for me. I don't have the management overhead of taking care of a technical team." Um, and we keep the cost in line. The economics work out for them. Other people have us build it and turn everything over to their own team, and that's cool too. I mean, we're happy to help.
Yeah.
So we do a little bit of both, maybe kind of a non-answer. We've actually helped some of our clients find their own resources. I mean, we're not really in that business, but whatever
Yeah.
it takes.
So I'd imagine for like a non-technical person though, like they would like hire you and just like that's their development team, right? Like ongoing for as long as they're in business. Like they don't want the headache of hiring their own people. Is that common in your business?
Yeah, it's common. I think what happens, Costa, is that over time, as the founder gets more comfortable with getting their product built and they're building their company at the same time, because remember they're busy doing a lot of other stuff, they start to understand what what's of strategic value for them. And usually a front end and a back end developer and a QA person isn't that strategic in the long view of the business. And I've started a number of companies, and I'm an entrepreneur, and we want them to be efficient with their money. And so we have a client in the East Coast that the product design and the product, what we would call the product owner, is critical to them. And so they employ those people, and those people are really, really good. So they do a lot of that design, UX, UI stuff because they want their look, and they consider that to be a strategic advantage. Cool. So it's not just a matter of, oh, I'm going to go hire my lead tech person and then start hiring developers. Uh, we provide the kind of runway and the test pad for them to understand what's really important to them.
Yeah, makes sense. So if you're a non-technical founder and they're going out to just wanted to do this on their own, right? Like hire their own people. Like
Yep.
what's some like general advice, things to be mindful of and look out for um, when making these hires, particularly on the development side?
Yeah.
That's
I
I imagine it's a very like tough, open-ended question. I know you covered a lot of it as well, but just like any tidbits or advice for people.
Yeah, for sure. I would I would look for somebody who really understood the business problem and the business space. Um, like our CTO and my friends who are CIOs or CTOs, they understand the business that they're in, and they understand what's important from a business perspective. The technical stuff, that works itself out, like picking a language or, you know, writing the algorithm or whatever it might be, that'll work itself out. But my first hire would be somebody who understood the business and the problem and my customer as well as I did. And they just happened to, know how to code or know how to manage people who code. So I would say that's the first thing I'd look for. If you want to call them the CTO, great. They probably want some kind of title like that. Um, but I'd make sure it was a business partner with a deep technical savvy. The trick is that person is going to almost certainly then immediately want to hire a couple coders. So the scenario, like here in Austin, would go like this. I want to bring in a CTO, co-founder, technical, co-founder. Great. They're going to want equity. I think right now it looks like the market's usually like 5 to 10% equity for taking that job. You can vest it over a certain period of time. They're not going to be cheap. A couple $100,000 kind of to start. And he or she's going to get started and have a lot of great ideas and contribute a lot to the business value. But then they're going to say, hey, I need some people to code. And let's say I need two coders and a designer. Well, those developers are going to be $100,000 to $150,000 a piece. And the designer is going to be, here in Austin, which is admittedly a little high, 85 to 125. So bam, there you've got $500,000 plus in payroll because you hired your technical co-founder and you gave up 10% of your equity. It's a pretty big tab to get a team started like that.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And so, Charles, if someone wants to learn more about your business and you, where's the best place to find you?
Our website, like everybody, our website, codeexitos.com, CODEXITOS.com. Well, I lost track of my spelling there. Type it 1,000 times a day. You can drop the link in there. We actually have a white paper out there on, or an ebook, I guess, on software development for non-technical founders. And so
Okay,
people can
perfect.
find that on the website, download it. And we're happy to talk to people. They just send us an email and say, "Hey, I want to kick my idea around." This spring we'll be at South by Southwest again. So if anybody gets down to Austin for South by Southwest, you can find us there.
Nice. And are you
Um,
based in Austin?
yeah, our headquarters is in Austin. I'm in Austin right now. I live here. Then we have about 100 people in Central America that are part of the team.
I was
But the
gonna ask
senior,
Code Éxitos. It
mhm.
has a bit of a like a Latin flair to it. So I was gonna ask if if your team is based
Yeah,
in South America,
Y-
Central
y-
America.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And Éxitos is just Spanish for hits or success or something like that. So if you're digging through the album bins, I'm a vinyl guy, and if you're digging through the album bins in Latin music, you'll see Éxitos a lot on the titles because it's the greatest hits kind of thing. So.
Yeah,
Uh,
nice.
but yeah, our team is all distributed in the Americas. So from North America uh, down into Central America and South America, but
I think that
all
also
in the
helps too
Central
if
and
you're
Eastern time zone.
building out like a remote team, which is obviously common nowadays. Being in the same time zone, like like I'm in Toronto myself, so like that Eastern
Yeah,
to Pacific time zone area.
time zone's super critical. There are two things that I think are really critical for your listeners to keep in mind: time zone and convenience. And by that I mean, like from Toronto, you can get to one of our development centers in a 4 hour flight, kind of thing. Nothing wrong with doing development work in Europe or Asia. I've done it a lot. It's just a long way to go. It's expensive. It's hard travel, and then you got the time zone just syncing up with people. So pay attention to time zones and accessibility. Like if we were going to build an app for you, we'd want you to either come to Austin and meet some of the team, or just come on down and meet the whole team in our dev studio, one of our studios. And the last thing I guess I would say to your listeners when if they're trying to pick an external partner, I get this question a lot. Like, how do I pick somebody? I would pick someone based on the style of work, the working style, and whether you like them or not. And people are like, what do you mean if I like them or not? I mean, it's not price or quality or, I'm like, no, it's a relationship. It takes a long
Absolutely.
time to build this software, and you got to be dealing with people that you trust and you like, and you can yell at them and they can yell at you. And yeah, everything about entrepreneurship is a really intimate and personal thing, and this
Yeah,
is no different.
I totally agree with that for sure. That's probably like my
Yeah,
number one criteria. It's like, at the end of the day, you're working with this person every single day, and it's very intimate, like you said, and it's got to be someone you get along with and share similar interests, and it's got to be a vibe.
yeah, yeah. And we evaluate again, as kind of an entrepreneur's perspective. We evaluate our potential clients through that same lens.
Yeah,
And there have been not a lot, but there are instances where we just politely tell people we don't
yeah,
think we're the right company
yeah,
for them. Because man, I mean, nobody wants to wreck someone else's life, right? We don't want unhappy clients, and clients don't want to be unhappy. So
yeah.
uh,
Awesome.
yeah,
Well, Charles, this was really insightful. I think a lot of people listening are going to get a ton of value from this, especially if you're a non-technical founder like myself. So this was very
yeah.
helpful for me as well. But I really do appreciate the time. Best of luck, and
Hmm.
I'll put in all your links in the show notes as well, wherever this is posted. And we should definitely do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And we could get our CTO to do something a little more technical if you want to dig into that kind of stuff. But I love the show and I love what you're doing out there to help entrepreneurs. So, any way we can contribute to the community, we're happy to help.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it again, Charles, and all the best.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right.